Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you yet again that you guys have still been doing an excellent job of this, but I want to continue reminding you about, if you feel so inclined, please consider leaving a question, comment, or concern. The super chat, super thanks, super sticker features, even tips and donations are greatly appreciated by me and my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network as a whole. So any kind of support that you give to the show and to the network is greatly appreciated by all. Without further ado, let's get into our second segment of today's show, another wide receiver room deep dive here with a team that's young, hungry. The big question is, can any one of these four guys I'm about to mention in this wide receiver room really step up as a wide receiver one for Jordan Love? Most importantly, year after year, and I'm kind of going to allude to your question, Easy B, about dynasty leagues, grow season after season to prove that the Packers have staying power. So let's talk about the Green Bay Packers wide receiver room. And I want to kind of go back to this question, Easy B, because I actually didn't really understand what dynasty leagues really meant, because I was just focusing on all-around fantasy football when I began the show. But in terms of dynasty leagues, if you're looking at a wide receiver room that's A, going to stay together for many seasons, and B, will grow year after year, much like what you might want in a dynasty league, the Green Bay Packers might be the team to do it. The only problem, though, is that there really is no one wide receiver who gives you a lot of production. It's definitely very evenly spread out, and that's why I wanted to talk about it in fantasy terms, whether you are in a dynasty, PPR, just a standard league, because of its intrigue here. Let's start off with perhaps the guy who will presumptively step into the role as wide receiver one in this offense for Jordan Love, in Jayden Reed. It's his second year in the league, perhaps the most versatile when fully healthy, and when these four guys are compared side by side, just because of his route running abilities, his understanding with Jordan Love, his rapport that he developed together. Because of that, I would say Jayden Reed profiles as the guy, quote unquote, so don't quote me on that, for Jordan Love to consider as a wide receiver one. And apparently in training camp, he's been getting the bulk of the targets as well. But over a 7-game stretch, with the wide receiver 10 in the league, averaging 15 fantasy points per game. So make of that what you will, because in this Packers wide receiver room, he's not the only one who is just as threatening. Romeo Doubs, a really interesting end zone threat, probably will get the bulk of the red zone targets in this offense. I really like his body control. I really like him at the catch point. Very physical kind of receiver, but he is kind of limited to that one area of the field. And then how about Dontayvion Wicks? Nobody really knew about this guy until he kind of burst onto the fantasy scene around mid-season. Was the wide receiver 4 around at certain area of time, top 5 in week 18, finished top 10 at the position in week 15. So in terms of fantasy, in terms of dynasty especially, going back to your question, Easy B, Dontayvion Wicks would be the guy to kind of see how he develops. His tap to learn says, I would definitely mind the Packers wide receiver room for dynasty purposes. Yes, because of their youth, because of the versatility of it, and because they are growing as a team, much like you grow year after year with your dynasty team, trying to trust guys who are young and are hungry enough to grow and produce for you many years down the road. These are the guys here. Now, the big mystery in this Packers wide receiver room is, of course, Christian Watson. Let's talk about him a little bit, because he was seen as the wide receiver one when he came into the league. And now he might not even get that many targets or even snaps, because he's a mystery. But when he is healthy, he is second in terms of PPR. That's another kind of league to look out for. And 8th in end zone targets. But he only played 9 games with a hamstring injury. So with these four guys, they all have interesting storylines. They all could mean something in this coming season, and they're all young, which is very important in terms of growth for fantasy purposes. If you just wanted to talk about this season, the Jayden Reed was the wide receiver 10 for 7 of the final 8 games for the Packers over last season. I think he would be the guy that you might want to pick up. I don't necessarily think you immediately go for him. He is kind of one of those flex guys who will get off the bench, maybe a wide receiver 2, 3 type. But for this season, I think he's one of those players who I might be willing to take a risk on, and you should do in turn. Dobbs, I don't necessarily think that highly of him outside of the fact that he can get a lot of touchdowns for you. But that being said, I don't view touchdowns as importantly as a fantasy kind of aspect than I do in other areas in the field, like yardage, target share, and things of that nature. So Dobbs is an interesting case, but I wouldn't necessarily draft him. I might stream him. I definitely ended up streaming him a lot down the stretch last year because he is one of those boomer bust guys, can have a big game, might not have a big game. So he's definitely going to be week by week basis kind of guy for the season, but maybe in terms of a dynasty league, his growth can be seen in years to come. Then Dontayvion Wicks is also up there in terms of dynasty league purposes, because if you want to draft a team this year for dynasty and have it grow, you might have to draft younger than you think. Dontayvion Wicks fits the bill perfectly, and I think that in terms of just a standard league, he might be a flyer option. I'm not saying he should be drafted. I'm not even saying that you should be willing to stream him. He's just someone who might be lying around in later weeks and you just happen to pick up and he just happens to be there for you. But like I said, to your points, easy B and tap to learn, I think that if you are drafted a dynasty league right now and you're thinking towards the future and what the player profiles might look like for some of these guys, Dontayvion Wicks is the sleeper. And then Christian Watson, I wish I could speak more highly of him because he has talent, great vertical threat, speedster as well, great ball control at the catch point. But this injury history, this injury profile really might just hamper him too much. And I really wish that I wasn't saying this, because out of all of these guys, if you were to just see them, say, during practice, during a normal practice, and have them run drills or something, you might just say Christian Watson is the best out of all of them. But that's not the case right now. It's not the case after the season we saw out of all of these guys, and it certainly might not be the case as even more Packers wide receivers. I haven't even mentioned a guy like Malik Heath, who's another fascinating option in terms of the red zone threat. I haven't even mentioned the tight ends either, who also play a big role in this offense. Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave, I really like them. Fantastic route running abilities from both of them. So the depth of this Packers wide receiver room, and outside of it as well, certainly gives me pause in terms of target share, which is perhaps my most integral thing when viewing a fantasy prospect. But it's definitely appealing in terms of where this group goes from here, because I don't necessarily think they've reached their peak just yet. Yeah, it seems cliche because this is only one season of Jordan Love we've seen, and we don't know if he's going to reproduce that this season. But if these wide receivers can prove week in and week out that they have a say in this and they have a force that can be reckoned with, then we're talking about a wide receiver core where you can definitely mine for talent for many years. This isn't just about this year. That's why I wanted to talk about it. It's for many years down the road. And I'm glad that you brought up Easy B, the Dynasty League, because it reminds you of how other people outside of a standard or PPR league might think about fantasy. They might think about fantasy as something that you can't just view on a one-year basis, but something that can extend into the future. You might not be drafting in a dynasty league this year. You might just be drafting in a standard league for many years, and you have been doing it for many years. But the point is, these guys are the guys you should be looking at right now, because, say, in 5 years, dynasty leagues may be even more popular, and you might want to join one. And you've been following these guys' careers for this long, as you could say, hey, why not take a chance on them for my dynasty team or my standard team now that I know more about them? Because they are a very interesting group to examine, and they're a very important group to examine because they are the youngest in the league. And that's not going to change for quite some time. That being said, my only caveat with them is that the target share might get messy for many years, because this is a very talented offense, and it's just adding more and more pieces and more depth to it. Josh Jacobs, who knows what he can be out of the backfield as a receiving target as well. There's just so many facets and so many complexities to this group that might give you pause, but at the end of the day, mind this group for talent. Follow this group. Don't just take my word for it. You do the research as well, because this group can bear fruit in many years to come. Let's just about do it for this segment of today's show. Coming up next, we talk about one of my favorite receiving cores in the league, one that certainly has a fascinating new trajectory and look to it that could be very contentious in the next couple of years. You might want to, definitely don't want to miss it, but we will be back right after the break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is